All right, we are live and in person. This is real. We're talking about today off the shelf people policies, and off the shelf. I'm thinking of as both the kinds of policies that you can get if you kind of do a Google search for uh, employee handbooks, but also just some of the really commonplace people policies that you'll find in companies of all kinds, all shapes, all sizes, all over the place that may not have been off the shelf in the sense that they're just simply generic, but they're off the shelf in the sense that they may be uh, that they may be common, commonplace, and often used. And I'm happy to have those of you who are here. We are hoping that I will be joined shortly by Angela Howard. Angela is a colleague and a teammate. We've done some collaboration together, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with her if she can overcome her technical difficulties. And if you were with me last week, boy, you know that as wonderful as this technology is, they have not made it perfect yet. It is not. This technology is not as sound, as solid, and as effective as uh, as Zoom is, for instance. So um, let me get into some of the ways that I think people policies are often uh, interfering with our cultures. They're degrading our cultures. They can really be interfering with the kind of experience that we want our people to have. And if you'll pardon me just a second, I'm going to make sure that as I'm talking, you can hear me. And so that's my way of checking. I'm glad to say you can hear me. Please feel free to type into the chat any questions that you may have. If you have thoughts or questions that you'd like to have become part of the conversation, I'm going to do my best to keep an eye on the chat. And I can even sometimes post your comments right there on the screen so that you can really be a part of the conversation, even though your voice isn't here present. So, one of the things that I find, and this is not exactly necessarily off the shelf, so I'm going to start actually a couple of degrees away from the title uh, of our live stream today. One of the things that I find is that people discover problems in their workforce and then they write policies to address those problems. And I think that almost all the time, this is kind of wrongheaded. So let me give you an example, right? The people on our team, maybe they're retail workers, or maybe they're assembly, working in an assembly plant. People, we're finding that they are on their cell phones, and so what we need to do, and we'd never thought of this before, what we need to do is we need to write a policy that says, "Hey, folks, while you're at work, you may not be on your cell phones." So now there is a policy to back up or a policy to define what professionalism uh, is in this organization. And here's a reason that I think that that kind of policy, the policy that's written to back up professionalism or written to specifically solve a problem of behavior on your team. Hey, I see Angela. Angela!
I made it.
On my headphones so I can hear
I'm
you.
so
All right, can I
sorry.
hear you?
Can you hear me?
Your audio's not great. You might want to click the little gear and see if you're using the right microphone. You want to? No, now I can't hear you at all.
You can't hear at all.
Oh, now you just sound like a robot from Star Wars. So I was just telling the folks, Angela, that one of the ways that I see policies being misused is when there's a problem in the organization. People are on their cell phones, for example, at their desks or at their station, And they write a policy that says no cell phones at work. And so this creates a problem in a couple of ways. One is you're constantly chasing people's misbehavior and having to write policy after policy after policy after policy, because folks, people are always going to find ways of behaving in ways that their leaders don't want them to. Right? That's just going to be a thing that happens. And so pretty soon you're going to have a policy manual this thick. Angela, you want to try speaking again and see if we can hear you better?
Hear me now.
You still sound like a horrible robot, so it's not really working. And so folks, welcome to live media. So Angela, while you maybe see if you can find some ways to address that, I'll share another reason that I think
Come back.
creating policies to solve problems doesn't work. Also, because let's say John is on his cell phone at his desk or at his station, his workstation, and that doesn't work for you and for some reason. That also, writing a policy to address that takes the place of sitting down with Jonathan, if that's the name that I use. You sit down with Jonathan and you say, hey, Jonathan, when you're on your phone at your desk, there are a few results that we might want to avoid. One, you either are distracted from work or you appear to be distracted from work. And so you're either not getting your work done or you're creating the impression on the people around you that you aren't taking work seriously. Can you do something about that for me? And so if you allow and in fact create the environment for those conversations to happen, then you're building relationships between manager and direct report. You're building an environment in which it's okay to have done something maybe undesirable and to learn from it. You're creating an opportunity to really be a relational workplace instead of a workplace that's designed and dictated by rigid policy. Angela, let's see if we can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, you're still a robot. You're still a crazy robot.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so looking forward to hearing it. So maybe another device. I don't know if you have an iPad or a computer that you can try to join us with.
Well, yeah, me now.
No, you still sound like a terrible robot. Well, we're gonna hope that Angela can try joining us from a colleague's computer, or maybe there's something else. But meanwhile, so we're talking about these prescriptive policies put in place to solve problems. Not desirable. So let me talk about one other type of policy, a category of policy that I find people using that is really destructive to the kind of culture that most people want to build. And this is a policy, and there are so many of them out there, that make things easier for the folks in HR, but they make things harder and more time consuming for the folks on the front lines. And I have a lot of compassion for the existence of these policies. Things like fill out this form in order to have this happen, right? In order to get your 401k, or in order to get your insurance, or in order for us to get you the ergonomic chair that you need, whatever it is, you need to jump through X, Y, and Z hoops. Meanwhile, this person at the front line is taking their time, their attention, and potentially their frustration. They're taking their time and frustration, jumping through these hoops to make life easier for HR. And we have to remember that HR is a service organization within our organization. It does not make sense, in my view, and we're going to hear from Angela in a second, I hope. It does not make sense, in my view, to have policies that require folks on the front line to jump through hoops and take them away from their work, serving the mission of the organization, bringing in revenue, serving our clients, in order to make life easier for HR. And again, I have a lot of compassion for that. I understand we all want to have our jobs be easier, and it seems to make sense to make the folks at the front fill out these forms or whatever it is to jump through these hoops. And I think it's really, really undesirable. Angela, can we hear you?
Can you hear me? Please tell me you
Yeah! Victory! You sound wonderful.
Oh, hello everyone. I am so sorry. I don't know if you all heard, we have this huge Comcast outage across Illinois. It's crazy over here, and so I've been trying to keep up with Aaron, and I've been listening to what you've been saying about out of the box policies. And one of the things I wanted to mention is this concept of, and Aaron, I want to get your perspective on this, the concept of equity versus equality. I think
Ooh.
policies tend to lean towards equal treatment for everybody, right? We got to memorialize this concept on paper and treat everybody the same. Where what you were speaking to earlier was around getting to know your people on a human level and having that relational aspect that's going to drive equity, not equality, because equity is what makes it fair and what makes it relatable to each team member on your team, and that it eventually drives up to driving your culture.
Mm. It's so important. And Cy Wakeman, I don't know if you're familiar with Cy, Angela.
Hmm.
She says, and I can't agree with this more, that you can't treat everybody the same because everybody isn't the same,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Some people require really close management or they're going to distract themselves and each other. Other people under close management are really going to rankle. You have to treat people as individuals, individuals who have different needs, individuals
Yes.
who have different levels of accountability. And to when it comes to equity and equality, for example, right? Uh, People with disabilities may have greater needs for things like time off or ergonomic chairs or things like
Hmm.
that. Providing somebody with a providing me with a healthy environment may not be the same as providing you with a healthy environment.
That's right. And I think that's really going to be the if we talk about the Great Resignation, we're hearing all of this culmination of the change. I call it the changing social contract of work.
Mm,
And the companies that are going to be differentiated, the companies that people are going to want to join, the CEOs, the leaders, the owners that are going to set themselves apart from their competition are those who put the work in to be equitable versus
mm.
providing blanket culture programs, blanket culture policies, blanket policies and procedures. You got to get to know your people. You got to get to know your people in order to serve them.
No kidding. I think there are so many ways in which we end up with too many policies,
Mm,
right? Not just the addressing a problem by writing a new policy, but it's kind of like, well, we're never going to see this again, or we can't allow this to ever happen to us again. So we've got to create something to
yes.
protect us from this happening ever,
Yes.
ever, ever again. Would you mind, Angela, helping distinguish between equitable and equal, just so that the folks at home, so we're sure the folks at home know what we're talking about?
Yeah, they sound a lot alike, right? So
Yeah.
equality is treating everybody the same. And there's a time and place for equality. You want to make sure that you have equal access, equal opportunities, right? We talk a lot about equality in that sense. Equality is allocating resources proportionately to the people who need it the most. And it
Mm,
takes another layer of human connection and building relationships to provide equity. Because it's very easy for me to provide equality, right? I have no risk of any social discourse from providing equality because I can go back to, well, we treated everybody exactly the same.
right.
Where equity is again connecting with people at a human level, but as humans we tend to lean towards equality because it's a bias, right? It's just easier. It's easier to do.
Yeah. So I know, Angela, when we were expecting to both begin at the same time, one of the things that I was gonna say to you and to the folks watching and listening is that I know that for the most part, you and I think very much alike. We've
Mhm.
had enough conversations now that I know we're aligned. I also wonder whether we might find some places to fight
Ooh.
where we have some disagreement. So I'm going to put some specifics on this equity versus equality thing. One of the places that I see, one of the off the shelf uh, policies is in the hiring process, in interviews. Here are your list of questions. Ask these questions of the candidates. Do not venture off of this script. Do not ask follow up questions. These are your questions. This is how we're going to make sure that we are equal.
Yeah. Mhm.
And not only does that not lead to the greatest understanding, this is one of the reasons that interviews are such notoriously terrible predictors of success and performance, is that if you're not permitted to ask follow-up questions, you've just got to take what they say at face value. You can't dig in, you can't delve. And to your point, it is not equitable because I, having the background that I have, the parents that I have, the education that I have, am very good at being interviewed. I
Mhm.
have those skills in the bucket. They're ready.
Yes.
Those tools are
Mhm.
are here and ready for me. The thing about follow-up questions is that they are so much more equitable because if somebody else comes in to be interviewed by me and they don't deliver as well as somebody else in their first initial response, it's the follow-up questions that are going to allow them to shine. That are going to
Mm.
allow me to uncover the qualities in this person that I want to have on my team that I never would have seen in the first blush question. What do you think, Angela?
Yes. Yeah, this is a tough one because, my background's in IO psychology. We are like assessment nerds. That's what my academic background is in. It's assessments and objectivity, and I do think that consistency is important with interviewing.
Mhm.
So when I work with hiring managers, I always tell them, look, the good thing to do is to have a consistent process that provides some guidance for hiring managers, for leaders, to help guide them with the questioning, but add your own flair, add your own magic, because uh and I want you to stay unbiased in the process.
Yes.
So that's an important piece to this, is you have to actually get people in the mindset. You got to change mindset about bias to acknowledge that we all have it. And, one of the things that I often do is, with an interview process, I make sure there's many, many perspectives included, from your highest level leader to potentially someone on the plant floor who can provide some perspective as to if this candidate would be a good culture amplifier and has
Mhm.
the skill set. And you get all those people in a room at the end of the interview, and you go around the room and you debrief. And at the
Yes.
end of the day, that hiring manager needs to make the decision, but at least you have the calibration of sorts of these different perspectives to make sure no one person's bias is driving the decision. So that, to
Uh,
me, is a more equitable process.
I love it, right? So equity here is, yes, there's a system. No, it's not incredibly specified on rails. You cannot diverge from this system in the least. By all means, I think everybody should have the same questions to ask and be permitted to ask follow-up questions and be permitted to be intrigued by what the person just said and be curious and recognize that there may be some gaps in this answer and that maybe this person isn't the best interviewee, and can we get more from them. And I hear you also saying that a diversity of interviewers also helps to create that equity by counterbalancing my biases with yours, right? And
Yes,
that is a system that works. Uh,
that is an
folks
equitable
have heard
system.
me folks have heard me talk about manager tools, and they recommend that you take notes, not on your own thoughts about their responses, but quoting their responses. That
Mm,
takes out some of the bias as well. When you come to that council, right? Let's talk about what it was like to interview Jackie.
yes.
Oh, well, I didn't think Jackie would be a great fit because she said, and I quote. I
Right.
thought Jackie would be a great fit because she said, and I quote, and I
Yes.
love also that you said culture amplifier rather than what we hear so often, culture fit. Can you talk a
Ugh,
little bit about that distinction?
yes. I don't think intentionally any of us are looking for carbon copy versions of ourselves. So, or maybe we are, but I would like to tell you that if you are doing that, you're probably not getting the best, brightest talent. You're probably not adding diversity to your team. You're probably not getting the best creative, innovative ideas because you've just copied and pasted into these norms that can't really be grown or innovated over time. So I like to say culture amplifier, which is this person going to drive the culture we're aspiring to? And that
Mm,
may not be what the culture is currently. So you got to look for people who are ahead of the game and adding something to the culture versus just fitting in.
I love it. Right. Was it Brene Brown who said that the opposite of belonging is fitting
Yes.
in?
Yes.
Ooh, ooh, powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely
So,
powerful.
Angela, where would you like to take the conversation from here?
Well, I did
I
want to
got I
mention.
got a plenty of opportunity to just go off and riff all
Well,
on my own.
I'm gonna tell you, like when I was not able to get in this room, like I have so much to say. I was listening to you and I was like writing everything down. I just want to mention that you're going back to an interview process. Your interview process sends signals to your candidates as well as to what your culture is like. So if you are going to have an equal, we this is our stringent process. These are our
Mm,
questions. The candidate's going to feel like you're robots. I mean, it's not going to allow your culture to shine if you
mhm.
have no humanness about your process. So I did want to add that is it's not just about the internal process, it's about how are you emulating your culture through this process, through this procedure or policy.
I think that's absolutely fantastic.
I kind of like the idea of the employee life cycle, because I think we
Mm,
sometimes we think of policies as like they're like point in time, but I like to think about culture as how it fits into the employee life cycle. We just talked about hiring. I think another piece is around like development. I think we can kind of maybe move our conversation in that direction around succession planning, development, learning and development. There's so many policies involved with do we promote people who have who don't have a bachelor's degree, or
mm,
do we build our succession planning pipeline? Do we have stringent processes as to how that works? And I think that really creates a barrier oftentimes to diverse talent. For example, breaking those barriers. So if diversity, inclusion, belonging is a part of your culture, is it something you're trying to drive? Looking at those policies around how people move about the company and how they're promoted
mm.
is another key piece. But what do you think? What's your experience with that?
Oh, I mean, I wrote so this maybe as an indirect response to your question, and I remember looking as I often do at a prospect companies. They were, we were talking about whether we were going to work together.
Mhm.
Looking at their website,
Mm,
and I went onto their leadership page, and or the about us page, and it
yeah.
started with their first value. The first core value was diversity, and
Mhm.
then there were 20 people, 20 photographs of leaders in this company. Ask me, Angela, how many of them were not white?
Aaron, how many of them were not white?
Zero. Not a single one of them was not white. And
Mm,
maybe I shouldn't be shocked by these things anymore. Well, I was stunned because 20 is a big number.
mm.
If you
It
have
does.
3 leaders and none of them is not white, okay. I mean, I get it, right?
Yep.
3 is not a big number. 20 is a big number. And so if you have promoted or hired 20 people into leadership positions and not a single one of them is doesn't look like me, then you don't actually value diversity. That's it, full stop. Right? That we
Correct.
value diversity statement, that's a lie. And you may be lying to yourself, and I'm not here to judge you as being evil, and you're going to have to revisit that value and decide whether it really is a value that you want to adhere to, or how to amplify that value if it really matters.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to a break in. I mean, sure, there's bias happening there. There is culture fit type conversations. You know, when you're in the calibration room and you're talking about talent, and you then say, "Well, she just doesn't. She doesn't sit well with me, or she doesn't have executive presence." Like all those things are things that eventually are damaging and ensure that people who are not white males don't get to those positions. But I would say the other thing is we have a lot of policies around what's the formula for who gets promoted next, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot of companies, larger companies especially, who have a pipeline where there is a formula. It's tenure, your flats performance rating, where you fit on the nine box, and I don't know, a fourth metric.
Right.
Again, we're talking about equality here. We're talking about objectivity. I love objectivity, but you got to look at those metrics.
Yeah.
If you know that your leadership team is not diverse and then the pipeline is not diverse, maybe you should think about hiring some external talent,
Right. And so
for
this gets
example.
to the off the box or the off the shelf policies, right?
Yes.
Tenure totally makes sense. If you want to be a VP here, you've got to have tenure. Makes sense. However, if you want to be VP here, you have to have been a director for X years first.
Hmm.
Makes sense.
Yes.
If you're the company, however, that I described, where the top 20 people in the organization all are white, well, then who's got tenure?
Right.
So if you're going to shift to actually valuing diversity and to
Hmm.
having a leadership team that reflects that diversity, you better stop using tenure as a metric because that defines that your pipeline is
Yeah.
white.
Yeah. And people, of course, don't think like that, right? They don't think, well, uh, a lot of times we see, and this is the difference between inclusion and diversity. Diversity is you could hire as many people of color, people with disabilities, women as you'd like, but once they're here, do they feel like they belong? Are we cultivating a culture of belonging? And if you're not doing that, then those people are leaving. So yeah, of course
Yeah.
they don't have tenure.
Yeah. Good point, right? That driving people out also affects who has tenure in your company. Wow.
Yes. And I
Um,
think the thing, I'm sorry, Aaron, one more
I,
point.
I was just, I would go ahead.
I was just going to mention that I think the thing that people realize is none of this is intentional, but it becomes intentional if you're not picking some of these things apart and really
Yes.
understanding how it's driving the culture at your
Right.
company.
What is the expression? Possession is 9/10 of the law. Right. It if somebody slips something into your backpack and you're now carrying around this illegal substance, well, possession is 9/10 of that law. If
Hmm.
you have a leadership team that's all white or all middle aged or all whatever, we're not saying that it's deliberate that you got there, and it is your responsibility to notice that you've gotten there and figure out what to do about it. I
Yes.
want to take a moment before you respond, Angela, and just remind the folks who are listening you can participate by dropping chat something in the chat. I think almost every time we're going to see it. There's a little bit of technical uncertainty there. Also, I'm going to try an experiment towards the end of our conversation and invite you, if you'd like, to join by camera. Crazy stuff, but
Ooh,
I think I can send you a link to our little studio here, and from wherever
nice.
you are, you can join the conversation. So, Angela, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about the hiring process. We talked about development, succession, getting people into leadership positions. I do think going back to your point around policies, out of the box policies. Many of you who are listening are probably owners, founders, business owners and, you know, HR is and I think you were mentioning this earlier, Aaron, which I think we might have lost you, but I think Aaron was mentioning this earlier that HR is a facilitator of some of these policies, and policies should really be kind of guidelines as well, right? Where there's a little bit of exception, a little bit of understanding relationally to the humans that are working for you. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was the involvement of incorporating the voice of your team members into the
Mm,
policy making process. So this doesn't have to be a committee necessarily, but one of the things that I would always advocate for is have a representative group just do a gut check on your policies. Is the legalese out of control? Do they understand the policy? Is it in layman terms so anybody across the organization knows what the hell it says? Like things like that.
yeah.
And HR sure can facilitate that process, but it's really the leaders who have to connect back in with their teams to make sure these things are relevant and they just make sense.
Mm. So we've been talking a little bit about values and the way that our policies really are our values, right? And it's one thing to put things on the
Yeah.
wall, but policies are where our values are operationalized, right? And how many companies, Angela, have you been in where trust is a core value?
All of them.
Yeah,
All of
one of our core values. We only have 5 of them, and one of them is trust. And how many of those? How many HR policies, Angela, have you seen that communicate, "You employee, we don't trust you as far as we can throw you."
mm. Oh,
Right?
absolutely. It goes up back to that point of, the minute something happens, we're rushing to write a policy on it. We're not digging into why it happened. And
Right.
all culture is, I mean, folks, all culture is, I know we want to complicate it and over engineer it. It is a culmination of your daily behaviors consistently over time and what you hold people accountable to. That's culture.
Right. So this is one of the most common things that I see in off the shelf policies. And these are so incredibly common. Is these policies that say we don't trust you, right?
Mhm.
Policies like and this is so common when you come back from your parents' funeral, we require you to bring us and show us an obituary or a death certificate, even to the point, where I've seen you're covering your eyes, see no evil. So, I saw only just last week a kind of an Ask Abby column that was really more like advice for managers about my employee came back from their stepfather's funeral and didn't have an obituary and didn't have a death certificate. They instead brought the program from the funeral home. And is that sufficient? And is stepfather close enough to get bereavement leave? Right? This is the kind of conversation that not only degrades the dignity of the poor person who went to mourn her stepfather, but it also degrades the dignity of the managers who are having to enforce, employ these inhumane, and I will go so far as to say inhumane policies that degrade people's dignity.
Yeah, I think there's a general mistrust of between the employer and the employee. I think if you think about the traditional workplace, um, traditionally highly monitored. I just go back to the industrial age, right? Like where this all originated. Widgets and what is it called? I can't think today. It's all on like process and then you put humans into the mix. Now we've got
Mm,
service industries. It's different. We're not talking about widgets. We're not talking about robots. We're not talking about machinery. We're not that's You can monitor all that stuff. Sure, you can distrust that it might not work because it's a machine, but humans inherently want to be good. And we oftentimes make up stories. I think about the people around us because it goes back to bias, right? We have a bias towards control. I think naturally the workplace has a bias toward control, and that's really what you're seeing when you see these policies
Mm.
that are out of the box. They're focused on control and monitoring, which is
So,
inhumane. I agree.
I mean, as a business owner, Angela, I don't want my people to take advantage of me and claim that they have bereavement leave or sick,
Sure.
they're going to the doctor. I don't want to be taken advantage of. What do I do about that? Right? That's what those policies are there for, so that I don't get taken advantage of.
I totally understand that, and and I'm sure you've been burned in the past, Aaron. But how much think about your energy as a business leader, as an
Mm,
owner. Where do you want your energy to be?
mm,
And I kind of go back to the hiring process, right? You want to hire good people who have good intentions, and if you're motivating them, if you're connecting them back to the purpose, if you've aligned their values and your values, I promise you there's good intent.
yeah,
If you're treating your employees like crap, if you are distrusting them, if you are treating them like a widget, yeah, they're gonna probably try to suck everything they can out of you because they don't feel treated well. So, chicken or the egg, I'm not sure, but you should really look internally first.
I love it. Right, and I'm reminded of my high school where the message was, "You better not cheat. We're going to
Mm,
watch you like hawks. If we
mm,
catch you cheating, you are going to fail." Right? The wrath of whatever is going to come down on you if we catch you cheating, and they did. They watched us like hawks. Cheating was rampant. It was like a game,
absolutely.
right? And then I went to college, and in my college there was something called the honor code, and it
Mhm,
required that at the end of every exam, the student said, "I wrote out the little pledge. I've neither given nor received aid during this exam," and you have to sign it.
mm.
And the professors are not permitted to be in the room during an exam. Cheating was almost at zero across the entire organization. You got to give
Oh,
trust to get trust.
absolutely. And I think, I might be optimistic here. We're both in the business of people and humanity, but people inherently, I feel like are good. I
Yeah,
feel like if they're treated well, if they're nourished, if they're given the resources, they're inherently good. And I feel sorry for the CEO, the business owner who is spending so much time and energy and worry distrusting their people. Uh,
me too.
so that
I,
makes me sad.
yeah, I love that. And this gets into a little bit, and we won't dig into this too deep, but it gets into the importance of close management. People are afraid of micromanaging, and yes, micromanaging is horribly destructive. It's also incredibly rare compared to absent management. And
Mm,
absent management also kind of leads to a cycle of where I'm absent and then I have to micromanage.
mm,
When you're close, when you're learning from the people on the front lines, the people who report to you, what they're up to, how they're spending their time,
yes.
and you're there to support, you're going to find out the few people who might be there to take advantage. And it's just going to become apparent, and you're going to be able to give them feedback, and you're going to be able to repeat that feedback, and you're going to be able to either change their behavior or weed them out.
Yes.
It's not necessary to engage in degrading policies like show us the obituary in order to find folks who are cheating you. They're going to be few and far between. And they're also, what they say, the way you do anything is how you do everything. So you're going to find them if you're closely managing people.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, it just goes back to leadership, right? HR is not the policy police, nor do we want to be, nor is it a good use of our time and our talents. Leaders are the ones who are at the front line. They're getting to know their people, and that's really what it comes down to is understanding people at a human level and building relationship. Even, even if you're a leader where that doesn't come naturally, you've got to learn about your people. You got to learn about what they stand for, what motivates them, and and take into consideration, sure, some of the policies that are in place, but how can you pick and choose from your toolbox how to better, I keep saying better serve them, but that's your job as a
Mhm.
leader, is to serve your people, not distrust them and put a bunch of arbitrary policies on them.
Indeed. Um, one other flavor of policy
Mm,
that that I think really degrades our cultures is viewing risk mitigation
mhm,
as preventing losing lawsuits. So the most common way place that I see this is in the performance improvement plan, right?
sure.
Here, here's a document that outlines the ways in which you are failing. It outlines the timeline by which you must correct it. It outlines that if you don't, we may fire you. Here, sign this. And it's especially the here, sign this that just gets me, right? I mean,
Mm,
I imagine, my wife coming home and my handing her a memo that says, we've been over this before. I asked you to park on the left. Please sign this to indicate that we've had this conversation.
that would not go over well,
It
Aaron.
would not go over well because it's gross. And I think the performance improvement plan is also gross. Um, there is no, so imagine instead of mitigating against losing the lawsuit,
Mm,
imagine mitigating the risk of being sued in the first place,
mm,
even by people that you may have to fire, right? Because you've treated them with dignity. You've said, we're having this conversation about your performance because it's not meeting standards.
mhm.
Here's what you need to do. Here's how I'm going to support you. And not leaving out the part of here's the timeline by which you need to accomplish this, or we're
Sure.
going to have to separate, right? But the the writing it down, the bringing HR in to have that conversation as if you need a babysitter, these things that degrade dignity because of this misunderstanding of risk mitigation just make my heart hurt.
Yes, yes, and I think gosh, the point about bringing in HR, you just feel ganged up on the inherent like two versus me. Think about that, and I do think there is this inherent just fear of a lawsuit, right? And to your point,
Mhm.
if you treated someone fairly, if you were transparent about the feedback, if you didn't wait until the performance review, if you were talking to people, being open and transparent all along,
And here's
think,
what I recommend, because it's good management,
mhm,
and because it also mitigates the risk that anybody would want to sue you, and it mitigates also the risk of losing the lawsuit, is take notes.
yes,
Angela,
documentation.
we just had this conversation. So I open up my Angela file and I say, today is November 9th at 1 o'clock. I said, thank you so much for being here. Really makes a difference when you come into the conversation. We have a more lively
Yes.
discussion. Thank you. And the positive feedback goes in, the negative feedback goes in. It's a running document of all the feedback that you've given people, including what are going to be the consequences. And consequences is a
Yes.
neutral term.
Mhm.
The consequences is we're going to promote you if you keep this up.
Right.
The consequences are we're going to demote you or ask you to leave the company if you keep this up.
Mhm.
So you can document things without making it formal, punitive.
Yep. So let me ask you this follow-up question.
Yeah.
Thresholds.
Mm.
Thresholds with those conversations, right? Because I think one of the reasons why, being in HR myself, right, having worked as HR many, many times, one of the things with the performance improvement plan is, you have some kind of milestone where you said, this is this is where it ends, right? This is where you've got 6 months to improve or else. Um, at what point is the coaching and the communication and the documentation, at what point do you say this isn't a good fit? What's the threshold for you from your perspective?
I think it's different for every company. And I think as long as you're setting clear expectations,
Hmm.
we have at will employment, right?
Yep.
If I say, Angela, here's this deeply entrenched habit that you have to get rid of, and by the way, you've got until next week.
Mhm.
The chances of my keeping you are slim to none because deeply entrenched habits are hard to kick in a week. Now, if it's a habit like raising your voice to your colleagues or calling them horrible names,
Mm.
then I've been generous,
Yes.
right? Because
Mhm.
though it's a habit, and I understand it's going to be a hard habit to kick, it's also just so incredibly toxic that we cannot tolerate it. In fact, I may not give you a week. I may say it never can happen again.
Right.
If it's being late to meetings, right? My wife is habitually late. She's working on it. It's taken her a long time.
Mm.
How can I
Yeah.
help you, Angela? Right? You're going to keep hearing from me. And by the way, you're going to hear from me with greater and greater intensity. And
Yes.
there are going to be consequences along the way.
Mm.
Like there are just going to be fewer meetings that we invite you to. And some of that you may be really glad for, right? It's like, oh, I don't have to go to that meeting anymore. It's also going to mean that you have less access to people who would support your promotion. So the first consequence, Angela, of you're not starting to come to meetings on time immediately is that you're going to be invited to fewer meetings.
Mm.
Or I'm giving you 3 months to turn it around. And if in 3 months I don't see at least like the last week of that you're on time,
Mhm.
then you're going to start losing access to these meetings. And then there may be more significant consequences up to termination, which, by the way, is a word that it may be kind of a little bit outside our purview talking about policies. But folks, you do not terminate people.
The
You
Terminator.
that's what I think about every time
Yes, me
Arnold
too.
Schwarzenegger, right, pulling out some large caliber weapon
Yes.
and ending somebody's life. That's what
Mhm.
terminate means. You may terminate their employment. You may separate from them. I don't even mind if you fire people,
Mm.
but terminating them, quit it. Don't do it.
Yeah, language does matter, and it does. I study workplaces, so it's amazing to me. Some of these like traditional things are just like baked into our language.
Yes.
Um, but to your point about, well, to my point and my question to you about the threshold thing, I do agree that not exemplifying core values, not or just counterculture to core values or values or behaviors is serious. And you can provide coaching, but you've really got to think about your culture is your worst behavior at your company. So how much of that can you allow to happen without it deteriorating your culture?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and you're going to have to decide as
Yep.
a manager
Yes.
individually, not by policy necessarily, what am I willing to tolerate on my team for how long?
Yes. And what impact is that? It's all, I hate to say it, but it's kind of a virus, right? I know we're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't want to hear that, but it is a virus. It
Yeah.
spreads.
Yeah.
And and then you are setting the standard for how other people treat each other. So now people are seeing this, observing this, and now it's okay. Now you've made it okay. So
That's right.
i- and this is how I know this isn't we're not talking about policy, but letting things slide has an impact on your culture as well.
Yeah. Speaking of thresholds, right? I mean, I tell people the threshold for giving somebody positive feedback is you appreciate what they did.
Mhm.
The threshold for giving somebody negative feedback is they did something you didn't want them to do. There
Mhm.
is no, it has to happen twice. It has to happen 3 times. It has to be a pattern. It's it's one incident
Yes.
is sufficient to say, "Hey, please don't do that."
Yep.
Or, "Oh, thank you for that. Keep that up."
Right. Right.
That's
Yes.
the threshold. It happened.
Yep. That's a great point. Simple, easy peasy.
Because
But
if it happens and you don't speak to it, then if it's something that you want to keep going, and as a theater director, I know if I see something on stage, if I see an actor do something on stage, if I don't say that, I want that, then the next time
Mhm.
they're going to try something else and I might lose it completely and we'll both forget what it was. I've
That's
got
a
to
great
name
point.
it.
That's a great point. Do
And
do more of that. I think that's something we
yes,
don't do enough of. Do more of
right.
that.
Yeah.
That's good
Um,
feedback.
and if you come, coming late to a meeting is an easy one, right? If you come late to a meeting and I don't say anything,
Mhm.
then I just gave you permission to come to a meeting late a second time. If you come to a
Yes.
meeting late a second time and I didn't say anything, that's my fault, not
Right.
yours.
Yep.
Because I said, oh, this is fine.
That's what your behavior signifies.
That's right.
Your symbols. I think we forget as leaders that we are constantly being watched.
Mm,
Constantly. People are not that they're, they're not being mischievous when they're watching us, but they are the things we do, the decisions we make, the things we call out that we don't call out, all of that is being watched and noted in people's
mm,
heads.
I love it. So I've got 10 minutes before my next call. So I'm putting into the chat, folks, I'm putting into the chat a link. If you want to click that link, you'll end up in the studio and you can tell us that we're full of crap. You can ask us questions. You can join the conversation. Uh,
Join
Angela,
us.
I think I've had an opportunity to say all of the things that I was planning to say.
I love it.
Uh, is there anything that that you want to say that you haven't had a chance to say?
Yeah, I think just going back to the original premise of this talk, and thank you again for inviting me, and apologies for for the screw up earlier. But I wrote down something. I wrote down the CEO is your chief culture officer, not
Mm,
HR. And I think we need
yes.
to remember that is I think it's just so easy for us to pawn off people issues, right? That's a people issue. Let's have HR handle that. But everything that is a people issue, because your people are literally the culmination of your culture. It's your community that you've built.
Yeah.
The CEO is the chief culture officer, and that ultimately needs to be the responsibility of a CEO. And so that's just one thing I wrote down, and I think it just is a nice wrap up to what we've been talking about today, which is this is
Yeah.
leader driven, this is leader focused.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it was central to what you and I initially planned to be
Yes.
talking about is very often leaders do say, all right, HR, we hired you, Angela, to be our HR person. Hand us the policies.
Yes.
And I can't think of a bigger mistake. Not to have, I mean, you want to have your HR people involved, of course, because these
Sure.
are the things that they think about day in and day out. And it is an abdication of a leader's responsibility to put the operationalization of your values and your culture into somebody else's hands and then to be hands off. So I'm so glad that you brought us back around to that.
Yes, it's so crucial. And HR, we are enablers, we are facilitators. I consider myself, I do a lot of culture road mapping. And the reason why I kind of stop there is because my goal is to equip companies and CEOs and business owners to sustain culture change. I don't want to be in the mix with you when you're executing culture because it's your job. I will be
Yeah.
there to coach, I will be there to mentor, to give you ideas, but it is the CEO, it's the leader's responsibility, and that's where just the magic happens, I think. And I think sometimes we forget that when we're in the weeds, or we've got a million things going on. We got to make profit, we got to grow the business, I understand, I totally get it as a business owner to a fellow business owner, but this is a key part of your responsibility. And if you are inundated and you're in the weeds, that's a whole nother talk we can talk about.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is
We can talk about that too. Maybe that's a next live stream for us.
I love it.
But folks, thank you for those who have come in and come out on the various platforms that we're live streaming on right now. Uh, this is an important conversation. We've really just scratched the surface, named only a few of the toxic uh, but very common policies and kind of families of policies that exist out there. Angela, I'm sure, would welcome people contacting her on LinkedIn. I would
Absolutely.
welcome people, if you'd like to talk about this further, connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me a direct message or ask to connect. We're here because we care about your business and we
Yes.
care about your people. Yeah, yeah.
Hearth.
Okay, I think this is the first time ever that I have in public on a live stream hearted
Hold on.
everybody.
Let's connect our hearts somehow.
Oh,
I'll
and
try to do
and
this.
Oda, we have Oda Zadan says thank you, and Oda, and to everybody else out there with Oda who has been in our audience, thank you. With your being there tells us that we're doing something valuable.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It was a pleasure having this chat with you, and
Yeah,
I look
likewise.
forward to doing some more.
Me too. Thanks, Angela. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.